What is this? Is it a camera? Is it a camera?
Back from the dead.
Hey guys, welcome to RVR. Today I'm going to show you how to build a computer. It's very simple, very easy. So we're going to take all the big myths about, oh, it's too complicated, oh, I really don't know how to do that, and all that stuff. We're going to dive straight into it. And first things first, you're going to need your motherboard. Check out right here. This is the ROG Strix X370F Gaming. This is an AMD motherboard for the AM4 platform. We're going to use a Ryzen 2700X as our processor, as well as a Sniper X 3000MHz RAM, 32 gigs, 2 sticks of 16 gigs. But we'll start with the basics first. We'll take this puppy out. Alright. So, what I recommend doing when you're doing a computer build, ooh, it's got some goodies. We'll look into that a little later. But make sure you have a clean space, label or lay out all your cables and stuff, because you're going to need some of these things. And sometimes the little parts that you miss and put somewhere and you lose them might be the part you might need to finish your build. So I always use the box of the motherboard as my motherboard stand when you're building, because that way you prevent ESD, which is electrostatic discharge, and you won't fry any of your components or anything like that. So I'm going to take this out of the ESD bag. Ta-da! Just going to lay it right here, just like that. Alright. So, just a quick glance. Here you go. Just a basic layout of everything. You have your PCI times 3 times 16, I believe. You got 2 lanes. And then your PCI 2.0s, as well as, I believe this is the M.2 slot. Nope, that's your M.2 slot, which is what we're going to use as far as our hard drive disk. Instead of using an SSD, we're going to use the new type. It's a 970 M.2 NVMe, and which is 500 gigabytes. Here's your RAM sticks are going to go in here. We only have 2 sticks, so you got to pay attention to where you're putting those 2 sticks on, because you're going to have to run the dual channel. And when we get to that part, I'll deep a little deeper into that. You got your CPU. Make sure nothing gets in that spot, because if anything gets in that spot, your computer, your CPU will just, it won't work. It'll fry. You don't want that, so try to be careful with all the parts. You have a couple motherboard connectors from your power supply that you're going to need, and make sure that your battery here is in good condition and stuff like that, because I've had motherboards come in and I'll turn them on and they won't turn on, and it's just because the battery just is faulty or was bad or dead, which I had in my 970 build. Alright, just a quick glance at the rear I/O. We have 4 USBs, 2.0s I believe they are, or it might be 3.0s because they're blue, so they might be the SS, the super speeds, as well as Cat5, audio ports, SPDIF. You've got 2 regular USB ports up top, as well as HDMI, and it looks like a mini DVI port coming out, but either way, that's just a quick glance at the motherboard. So we're going to lay her down right here, and first things first, I'll leave the CPU as far as like the sliding components. We'll leave the CPU for last. That way we'll minimize the risk of damaging the CPU in any way, shape, or form. So we're going to start off by installing the RAM first. And after we install the RAM, then we'll move over to the CPU, and then after that we're going to move into actually putting this into the case and using the mounting screws and everything else, and making sure our rear I/O plate comes in the back and everything lines up. Once you get to that point, then we'll move forward installing the graphics cards and installing a couple other more things. Alright, so here we have the Sniper X 3000 megahertz DDR4 RAM. It's 16 gigs per stick, so 32 in total. Now, I do there's a little bit of conflict going on with the AM4 motherboards and RAM. There's a lot of RAM sticks that are not compatible, and in order for you to have the best setup, there will be a list down in the description. I'll have a link there, and you guys can click it, and it'll show you every single compatible RAM with the motherboard, and make sure that that it actually can communicate. If not, then you might have some issues and compatibility issues with your CPU and stuff like that. So we're gonna take this out. So it just comes with a little G-Skill sticker. We'll put that. That's a case badge. All right. Should just pop out just like that, and this will pop out just like that. All right. So this is pretty much the RAM stick. Now it has just some key information on there. It'll tell you how your memory voltage and stuff like that is actually going. This is XMP 2.0 ready, which is an Intel thing, and I know we're doing AMD, so that's why it's a big whoop, but we'll make things work. So here, all right, so now we're gonna go ahead and install the RAM. And before you install your RAM, you gotta make sure that your RAM is compatible with your motherboard and your CPU. So for that, I'll have a link down in the description where there's a list of different types of RAMs from every type of manufacturer that is compatible with the X370 and also the Z370s and other motherboards that are in the same type of series. That way you don't have any miscompatibility with anything, and have a system that actually works. And I also recommend looking at the manual to see what type of DIMM slots you're actually going to install your RAM, whether you have 2 sticks or 4 sticks. If it's 4 sticks, it's kind of pretty straightforward if you install all 4 sticks. But if you're installing just a two-stick solution, you want to make sure that you're installing it in the right channel so you can have that dual channel system actually going. So as you can see in this one, for the X370F Gaming, we actually are going to use DIMM A2 and B2 for the dual channel setup. So it's pretty straightforward, and I already unboxed it before. All it comes with is just a little G-Skill case badge, but this is pretty much the RAM stick itself, 16 gigs per stick. We're using 2. So the main thing here you want to focus at is noticing exactly the labels where it says DIMM A1, DIMM A2, A3, and B1 and B2, sorry. So we're going to use the second slot and the second slot for B and A. So now you just want to push back on these tabs. Once these tabs are pushed back, then you can go ahead and install your RAM. Now the RAM is notched. You'll have a longer part and a shorter part for the DDR4 setup. You want to make sure that the right side is on the right side. So I know it's pretty self-explanatory, but you'll be surprised on how many people miss that. So we'll just put it down, and when it locks, that's when you know you've pushed it down far enough. Don't be scared to push it down just a little tightly, and as you can see, you can hear it click in both sides, and the notch did come back up. So that RAM is now successfully installed. We've got one more, same type of stick. We're going to install it right here. Ba-ding, ba-bow. We're just going to push down. You heard both clicks. This one's still slightly up. You see, these are the things you need to catch. And now it clicked in. So with that being done, we're going to move over to the M.2, which is going to be our internal hard drive memory system that we're going to use for this system. And it's pretty straightforward. So you can see I've already got the female mounting screw that should come with your motherboard. And we've just hand tightened that. So you just want to screw that down and make sure it lines up with your M.2 memory. Now, for this build, we're going to use, the 970 EVO M.2 NVMe internal hard drive from Samsung. I've heard a lot of good reviews about it. It's 500 gigabytes, so I'm going to install the operating system and a whole bunch of other stuff on this. So this will be my only storage for this build. I really don't think I'll pass 500, but if so, I have some other hard drives and the other build that I have that I can move over. So we're just going to slide this in, and you just kind of want to be gentle, but at the same time a little firm. Just push it on in there, and you'll feel it click. Now you want to make sure you have your male bolt, and just put that puppy down in there just like that. I'm going to get a tiny tiny bit Phillips. Might be flat in your case, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be Phillips for everything. And once it's in, you just want to hand tighten it. You don't want to put it too tight now, but you do want to put it firm enough to where it's not really going to move much as you're installing everything else. Alright, steady. Now we're going to go ahead and mount this motherboard into our case in the back plane, and from there, actually no, we'll install the CPU first with the cooler, and then we'll go to the case. Alright guys, now we have the AMD Ryzen 2700X. This is a 8-core processor with 16 threads. This thing is a bad mamma jamma. Now it does come with a cooler, so some of the processors before I know came out and they did not have a cooler, made you buy a H2OI or whatever it is that you wanted to buy after the purchase. So this is pretty cool that it does come with a cooler, that way you don't have to do 2 purchases, and it's not a bad price for what you get. And from all the research I've done, compared to the 8700K from Intel, this does really, really well. As far as multi-thread applications go, this takes the upper hand every time, and for the price, it's a little cheaper, and I think you get a whole lot more bang for your buck. Especially if you're not just a straight gamer, if you're a film director or someone that does a lot of After Effects or any type of computer rendering or anything like that, you would want to go with a multi-core solution. That's kind of why I went this route and went AMD instead of Intel, because even though Intel has a lot of high, fast speed, single core thread speed, or whatever you want to call it, when it comes to multitasking, I believe AMD is just a whole lot better. Plus, I've always been an AMD guy, and I've never had any issues with any of the AMD components that I've ever had. So we're going to go ahead and unbox this sucker. Open it just like that. And the first thing that we see is the Wraith cooler. Alright, so pop the little cover, and there it is. So it kind of comes already, I don't want to say pre-mounted, but it comes with in the direction where you're going to have to install it pretty much onto the motherboard. So this is a RGB lighting cooler system, so as the fan is on, you can control the color, that way it matches your rig, and you don't have to buy extra LEDs or buy another cooler that has RGB lighting effects. And it's pretty straightforward. Comes with pre-made thermal paste, which I do not recommend. We're going to be scraping that off and actually adding our own thermal paste compound that we bought. The reason being is because a lot of times if the processor sits at a store or something like that, you don't really know when they actually shipped it out or got it from the store. This thermal compound could become dry, and when you put it and it heats up, it may not sync to the processor as good. So we kind of want to eliminate as many issues and risks that we possibly can. So we're going to scrape that off with some alcohol, and we'll go forward straight from there. So I'm going to put the cooler aside, and we'll talk a little bit more about the processor itself. So here it is. This is the Ryzen 2700X. There's a difference between the X and the regular. Now, this one, I believe, is the stock clock speeds are 4.35 gigahertz. Which is pretty quick when you talk about 8 cores and 16 threads. Definitely not a slouch, and it is the top of the line AMD processor at the moment. Now there are rumors later on that they're going to come out with a couple more higher end processors, but for right now I think the AMD Ryzen 2700X is pretty future proof. There's only a couple more processors that are actually on top of this, and at that point you're talking about the Threadripper series, and once you're at that level, I don't think you're no longer at the mid-range and a little high-end and like gaming enthusiasts. You're really at the professional video editor type of stage where it's really like too much performance where you really don't need it. It's not really gonna make sense, bang for buck, if you're just a regular consumer just trying to buy a PC or a gaming build. So we're gonna go ahead and take that thermal compound paste, and there's not much else that comes with the processor. Just the processors itself and the cooling solution and some pre-made thermal paste and some instructions on how to actually install the processor and heatsink together. So with that being said, we're going to move over and we're going to clean the thermal compound from the cooler. Alright guys, we're going to be using the Thermaltake TG7 thermal compound solution instead of the prefab manufactured thermal paste that they have. So, as you can see, I've already started it just a tad bit, and it's really not that hard. You just take some isopropyl alcohol, just put it down there, and just scrub it away. And it'll come off. It just needs a little elbow grease. Now, after we clean this off, we do have a microfiber towel that we're going to wipe on it because we do not want any type of residue or anything to linger, because then that will cause issues with the compounding of the processor and the heat sink. So, put a little more of this on there. Gotta make sure she's clean. And like I said, you don't have to do this. You can skip this step if you would like and use the manufactured thermal compound, but me personally, I have a fetish when it comes to thermal compound. I really like for it to be secure and fresh. That way, it's not that much time that we have to wait for it to actually blend with the CPU and the heatsink. So as you can see, it's almost off already. There's one more. Wipe some of this excess away. You really want to focus just on that square, kind of where the thermal compound was, because that's really where you're going to line up your CPU, which is another reason why I don't like the manufactured thermal compound, because when you sit it onto the CPU, what if that square is really not lined up where the processor really is going to be, and now you have issues between the joining metals. So I've got this microfiber towel here that I'm going to use. And make sure all the excess little stuff is off. You could use, like I said, whatever you want. Just make sure it's something that doesn't leave a lot of flakes or any type of dust or anything. Wipe that sucker clean. And now she's clean. And we're going to actually install the thermal paste on the CPU. Just a dab. We're not going to do a whole lot. You don't want to put too much on it to the point where you put the cooler on top and it spreads and it leaks on the sides. You just want to put a nice little dab on it, and then from there it'll spread out as you flatten the cooler onto the CPU. So we're going to set that aside, and now we're going to go into the actual mounting of the CPU. There's a couple key things you need to look for. You will notice on an AMD or any type of processor, honestly. Alright, so you can see, really the only thing for the CPU when you mount it is you just take this latch up, and as you can see here, it's up for unlock. We'll move that up, and as you can see, that's what locks in the pins into the actual socket. So we'll leave that up just like that. You want to be really gentle when you're messing around with the CPU, because this is the most important part of the whole entire build. Now you'll have a little gold notch there. That gold notch will notch with the CPU socket. It'll be a little tab there where you can see it, just like that. And that's kind of where you'll mount it. So when you put the CPU on, you want to be really gentle. And it should pop right in just like that. Because as you can see, they're now actually pinned, unlike the old days where they were actually flat and you'll have pins there. So I'm glad they made that change, so it should be a whole lot easier. Now you just tighten her down, and boom, that's it. She is now locked, and your Ryzen CPU is now installed into your motherboard. So with that being done, we're going to go ahead and take our thermal compound and just put a tiny little dab. As far as the cooler goes, as you can see on the AM4 motherboard right here, we have these two little hinges. Now the CPU cooler, as you can see, these little tabs That's what's going to grab a hold of those hinges and actually lock it into place with this locking mechanism right here once we've added the thermal compound and do everything else. And you should have a connector right there. That'll be for your CPU fan, but we'll get that into that in a little bit. So let's go ahead and open up the TG7 box. And you can use any type of thermal compound you want to use. So this was just what was in the local Best Buy. And anything like Dynex or Cooler Master or Corsair or any type of thermal grease. It's actually what you want. So I'm going to be very, very, very careful with this. You just want to put it down just like that. Just put a little bit on, just a tiny little dab, just like that. And that's probably enough right there. Now when that CPU cooler goes on top, it'll flatten out that thermal paste and actually give it a smoother and better bond than that factory pre-made stuff. That's why a lot of people actually go into the thermal grease and the aftermarket ones instead of just sticking to that. But you'll do whatever you want. Now this TG7 does come with a spreader, so you can spread it around the CPU if you want. Since we have the spreader, we might as well going to go ahead and use it. So, but it's also not a bad idea too. So just take the cooler and just slap it right on there, and wherever it actually spreads to, it'll spread to. But we're gonna have to spread this out just all over the place because we want to. I'm just going to spread it all over. Just try to get an even coat too with the thermal compound. Don't be shy with it either. I'm going to add just a tiny bit more and the CPU should be ready.
It looks yummy.
Does it? Well, I don't think it'll taste yummy. I've never tasted it before, but just gonna add a little dab there, and there. So I actually, funny fact, I really didn't know that it came with a spreader till now, and I actually looked at the case and I saw that it came with a spreader. So that's pretty cool if thermaltakes actually do that. So, and I was wondering why this one was actually $1 extra compared to the other brand that they had, which I cannot remember off the top of my head. But it's a pretty good spreader, I'm not even gonna lie. Like, I actually like it. It's pretty neat. Pretty cool thermaltake. Thermaltake for the win. Alright.
Icing on the cake.
Icing on the cake, exactly right. So we're gonna put that there. Now we're gonna take our cooler, and I recommend looking at your cooler and actually aligning it the way that it's supposed to be aligned. A lot of people put it like this, and then you know, it goes like this, and just do whatever makes the connector better to connect. So if that made any sense, because it probably didn't to a lot of people. But I'm gonna mount it this way because my connector wire is here, and it's gonna connect to that little socket plug right there. So I'm gonna gently put this right on top, just like that. We're gonna be easy with it. Make sure that both sides are actually hooking. Alright, so I hate doing this, but we're gonna just do this because it might help out a couple of you guys. But if you're having issues with the cooler, land one side, and then once you land the side that's farther to the actual clasp, then move to the other side and get that. The reason I hate doing that is because it's not even, you know, but it'll definitely help you get your cooler up in there. And that's it. So now we're there. I'm just gonna give it a nice little wiggle, make sure that thermal compound is touching on both, and we're gonna lock this into place. So we're gonna push this up and it'll scroll down like that. I'm just being real gentle with it. In 3 seconds, it should go. And that's it. Now our cooler is locked in place. As you can see, it's now locked. We now have the thermal compound on. Our CPU is mounted, and we're one step closer to actually finishing the build. Another thing too, before I forget and go any further, you do have some plastic covers on your heat sinks and stuff. You kind of want to make sure you take that off because they will get hot, and you might forget and start it up and smell something burning, and you don't really want that. We're going to put this case badge with the other case badges, and I thought there was some other stuff, but I guess not. Alright. Ooh, that's really shiny. That's nice. Alright, so we're going to hook this up to, you know, now that I'm looking, actually, so now that I'm looking, this is actually our CPU fan right here. That is our actual CPU fan. The way you can tell is the way the connector is. It'll be a special type of connector made for specifically for the CPU fan. So we're gonna hook this right up in here, just like that. I feel like I'm trying to be too gentle with it, but you know what? I've got time. There it is. It's now in there. So we now have our CPU cooler mounted, our actual cooler for the CPU mounted, our RAM and our internal hard drive is now mounted. So the next step we're going to do is we're actually going to install the motherboard into the actual case. After we do that, then we'll go into the graphics cards, and really there's not much left, and we'll pretty much be done. You save a lot of space by going into an internal hard drive instead of a bulky hard disk and all that other stuff. So let me Alright, a couple things I forgot to mention. Now, since this cooler, the RearViewReview cooler with the RGB does have RGB features, you're going to need to hook, as you can see, into the cooler itself, a RGB header and their USB slot for whatever it is. So, for the header one, remember that white one I was telling you about that was the CPU fan? Well, technically it is, technically it's not, but it's going to hook up right there. We're going to leave the wires loose because we're going to hook up the wires in a zip ties and actually make it look pretty. But this should just slide right up on in there. If I am lining them up right. There it is. So now that's in. And this will actually hook up to, you guessed it, USB. So you're going to look on your socket connectors in the bottom and see exactly where the USB one is, unless you could find one somewhere else. Like there's one right here for mine. So you want to make sure your notches are lined up, and now that I look at it, this one will not fit in that one, so I don't think that is a fan one. That must be for something else. USB 3.1 actually, and so we'll just have to hook it down here. I was actually hoping it'd be a actual socket up here for that reason, but I guess there's one there, but it's not gonna match up with this. Yeah, because my blocked one is actually on the right side, so it will not work, which is stupid. Stupid. But that's okay. We should have that's another RGB header right there. Got our control sensor there. USB 34. Boom, right there. Now, you want to take note also when you're installing some of these things that you have the case connectors also that are going to be wired into your motherboard. So you kind of want to lay everything out, and you're probably going to have to change things later on just to make things a whole lot more cosmetic looking and stuff to make it look better. Clearly we can't just have cables like this because we're going to fit 2 Vega 56s right here. So with that being said, we're going to move on and actually install the motherboard into the case itself. This case actually already comes with the stand-up stands already in them. So we're just going to lay this here, use the screws that came with the case for the motherboard, and just hook them onto the motherboard mounts, and we should be good to go. This is a standard ATX motherboard, so it's not like a micro or a mini or anything like that. So it should be pretty straightforward. So we'll just lay this down, and the bad thing about this is that it's all black, so I can't really see exactly how it's gonna land. So I am literally just playing with it. You should have a little hook on the bottom, and that'll line up with one of your holes. I believe that's the hook right there actually. So that will line up. Should be with that hole right there. Should be. It's not lining up.
There are a lot of glare.
I just need a light up in there. Alright, and you'll see that the little stud that actually goes through from the case will actually go on the one that's silver all around. Not like this where it's silver and half black. All the other ones are like that, as you can see, and this is the main one right here that'll be like that. Also, just to guide you, just make sure the rear I/O panel is actually aiming out. That way that'll kind of guide you in which way you actually need to go. So now we're going to install the rear I/O panel, and then we're going to tighten her up, and from there on we'll continue on to the next steps. Alright, so I went ahead and hooked all the connectors from the panel, the front panel. You need to look at your manual. Depending on your motherboard and your case, you'll have different stuff. So here I have my power, my hard drive LEDs, my power LEDs, my reset button, all your switches and stuff like that will actually be shown in your booklet, and it'll tell you exactly the pin outs on everything, because every motherboard is slightly different. Most cases they're mostly the same, but you'll have a couple things here and there that actually are different, so you need to pay attention to that stuff. So look at your manual book, and from there hook up all your connectors, all your fans, stuff like that. Now we have gotten to the point where we're going to go ahead and install the graphics cards. Now we're going to install one here and here. We have 2 graphics cards. We got 2 Vega 56s, Pulse Sapphire editions, and one's going to be up here, the other's going to be down here. Because it's a Crossfire setup and it's the new Vega system platform, we do not need a Crossfire bridge. It's internal now. It's not like NVIDIA where you'll have to have your SLI high bandwidth module like I have here. This is internal. You just hook them up and you're good to go. There's no SLI cable or Crossfire bridge needed anymore as far as the Vegas go. So I'm going to go ahead and unbox one of these. Actually, I've already unboxed this one. We're going to do this one first, and it's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to open this up. Pretty much in the box, all we're going to have is just the actual video card itself. If I can never get this thing to come out. There it is. Ta-da! This is the Sapphire Pulse RX 56 Vega. Now, this is AMD's newest Vega platform, and it's one of their cheaper cards as far as the high end is concerned. A lot of people compare this to a 1070 or 1070 Ti, depending on which brand you actually get. But I've got two of them, so there's really not much that I'm not going to be able to do. Gaming wise, I'll be capable of playing whatever I want with good frame rates at 4K. Having an SLI or crossfire setup, excuse me. And as far as the main purpose I got them for was for the rendering, stuff like that, Adobe Photoshop. These cards are really, really good for that. And a lot of the benchmarks you'll see, they'll actually surpass the 1080s and the 1080 Ti's as far as rendering and stuff like that. So that is why I went with the Vega 56s, and that's why I also recommend going with the Vegas instead of the NVIDIA 1080s and 1070s and stuff like that. But to each need is different, and whatever your need is what your need is. So I'm going to just lay this down. We're going to go ahead and take out. This case actually comes with more like a thumb screw application, so I can actually take it loose with my thumbs, but depending on your case, and just for a reference, we're going to plug this one here up top. So as you can see, for reference, that'll be the one that we're going to need to take out. So we'll take this screw out right here. It's just a simple come out, and once you take that off, you're probably going to have to take the bottom one off too. It should just come out just like that. We'll go ahead and take the bottom one off too, because this is a pretty beefy graphics card. It's probably going to take up both slots. So we'll just take that other thumb screw out. Just comes out just like that. Take your graphics card. Make sure your cable isn't in the way of anything. Make sure to put this pin back just like we did the RAM. We're going to push this back, and when you put the graphics card in, that'll pop in and lock it into place. So we're just going to slide this bad boy up in here, just like that, and a little elbow grease, there it is, just like that. You want to make sure to keep those screws you have and put the screws back into place. This will give the graphics card a little bit more stabilization. Alright. I'm going to put the second one there too. Make sure it's held in place. Alright, it's in there, and like I said before, you don't need a crossfire bridge. They no longer require them. Please make sure you take off the plastic because these cards will get hot. So make sure you take the plastic off the front. And I believe I took the plastic off of that one already because I already unboxed it, because I was wondering about the crossfire connections myself. But as you can see here in the middle, you'll have two power connectors. We have a 850 watt modular power supply that we'll be hooking up both of our graphics cards to. But let's go ahead and mount the other graphics card, and after that, then we'll go ahead and start hooking up the power to our motherboard, our graphics cards, both of them. We don't need to hook a power to an optical drive or nothing like that. We don't have any of that. So it's pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and get the other graphics card. After that, we'll hook power. Alright, we went ahead and installed the second graphics card, and we went ahead and hooked up all the power supply connectors to the motherboard, because each motherboard's different. each case is different. The way you wire your stuff is going to be a little bit different. So we went ahead and hooked up the second one. We've got the first one. These graphics cards do take up a lot of power, so that's why I went with the 850 power supply. I went ahead and routed all my wires the way I wanted to route them. It's not super duper fancy, but it's there. It's clean. I also took out the hard drive bay completely. I'm going to close this back panel, put this panel on, close the side panel, and we are pretty much complete. All the connectors are connected to the motherboard, all the power connectors, everything's pretty much good to go. I'm going to run benchmarks, and I'll upload a bunch of the benchmarks results, and I'll make different videos of different games of the benchmarks. That way you guys can see exactly what this machine is capable of doing. I hope you had a great time watching this build getting made, and stay tuned for the next one.